My kind of whole approach with the book is working with women who are in their 20s who feel like they're failing because they haven't ticked all those boxes that society expects of them, and helping them reevaluate, actually, where do these boxes come from? Is that even what you want? And how do we move forward, overcome this anxiety? Because the truth that all of us over 30 know is 30 is not the deadline. There is no bomb that goes off at 30 if you're not married and you don't have a 6-figure salary in your bank account. It is just the beginning. Life only gets better after 30.
I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. This episode, we're joined by Kate Berski, co-founder of Curlsmith, a high-performance, inclusive haircare brand which she started with her husband in 2018. It soon became one of the fastest growing textured hair brands and would go on to retail at Ulta Beauty, Target, Boots, and many more. The idea for Curlsmith was formed out of a family struggle to find suitable hair care products for Kate's niece's curly hair. Kate and her husband Mikhail soon realised there was a gap in the market, with lots of people unable to find appropriate products for their hair. Using her experience in advertising and brand consulting, combined with Mikhail's experience working for some major beauty companies, they soon developed a community around an Instagram page that they launched, which shared advice, recipes, and tips for people with curly hair before they began the process of making their own product. In this episode, we discuss the hair care industry and how Curlsmith was brought to life, the journey and cost of developing a product, the pros and cons of staying lean as long as possible, digital versus retail channels, going down the VC route and how that helped grow the business, the toll a startup has on your mental health, having a kid while running a business and realizing there is more to life than work, what it's like to sell your company, how entrepreneurship compares to becoming an author, and much, much more. We hope you enjoy the episode. Do let us know what you think when you've had a listen. Well, firstly, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I've been excited about this chat. I love to talk, as you'll find.
Oh, it's my dream kind of guest. So I want to really start where I start with most guests. How did you get into entrepreneurship? Because there's so much we can unpack with you. And we talked about the startup life, there's influencer life, there's everything in between. But let's start with the startup. How do you get into this space in the first place?
Yeah, I guess I was one of those kind of, I don't know if reluctant, but unexpected entrepreneurs. So at the time I was freelance brand consulting. My husband, Michał, who's my co-founder, he was working in big beauty companies. I think he was at L'Oreal at the time. And he said, I'm gonna leave and I'm going to start this business. And I was like, cool, yeah, really supportive about that. Didn't realize supportive would mean actually being part of the business in quite a significant way.
Did he? Did he have a grand plan?
I don't know. I'm starting to suspect, to be honest. He's got a way of dragging me into things. He started the project and I was just in a meeting and then just this and just that. And because I was a brand consultant, obviously anything to do with creating a brand was my wheelhouse. So yeah, ended up just kind of being my life for the next 5 years or so.
I love it. And so you're already, and we were talking just before we started recording, you actually know one of our former guests, the incredible Kuba, who talks a lot about branding in his episode. But you were already helping different companies, different startups, some really cool startups with their branding. So was it even on your radar, like these startups are doing this, that would be fun to do one day, or just totally your husband can go and do it and you think that's cool, but you didn't want to do it yourself?
Yeah, a bit of all of it, really. I guess both of us had worked in corporate. So I had worked on the agency side in market research, marketing agencies, brand consultancies, advertising agencies for years, but mostly on big corporate brands, big clients, brilliant brands, global brands. And he had worked for L'Oreal, Unilever, P&G, creating brands, creating products and bringing them to market. So we had quite corporate experience and neither of us really liked that. And we both wanted to work for ourselves. I thought I just wanted to be freelance and I was really enjoying that. He knew that he wanted to start a business. So yeah, as I said, I kind of got dragged into it. But in terms of how the whole idea came about, I guess I found myself specializing a lot in beauty and personal care because I just obsessed with everything from head to toe, beauty and personal care. So I ended up being a bit of a specialist in my agency on that stuff. So I was working, consulting for a lot of the world's biggest beauty brands, skincare, haircare, makeup, whatever it was. And he was working for those companies. And we both privately noticed that those big corporate brands at that time, back in 2017 or whenever it was, were ignoring huge chunks of the population. So particularly in hair care, 70 or 80% of the world's population have some kind of hair texture, whether that's wavy, curly, kinky, coily, whatever it is. And only 1% of the launches in that time were actually in any way relevant to that hair type. So they were being ignored. I was working at the time for a very famous electrical beauty brand, and they had a running joke about doing a hairdryer for curly hair, and we're laughing about how niche that would be. And I thought that actually isn't that niche if there's a huge part of the population. I think there was a lot of fear of that hair type. I think it's changing now, but even hairdressers were not trained in cutting and styling textured hair as standard. So girls with curly hair cannot walk into any old salon and get a really good haircut. It's still seen as a specialist and a niche area, even though it's very much not a niche. So we kind of already had it on our head that was a bit of a missed opportunity. That was kind of like an opportunity that was being left on the table. But it really started when things got personal, when our two nieces were born, and they have incredibly curly hair, and my sister-in-law has incredibly straight hair. And she was like, you guys, I have no idea what to do with my kids' hair. She was calling us up in a panic. I don't know what to do. It's a bird's nest. What products are there? How do I use it? Oh my goodness. You work in beauty, give me some advice. So we started doing a bit of research. And at that time, you couldn't walk into Boots and see hair products for textured hair, or you'd walk into some stores and the brands that were there were quite alienating. They were either targeted at a very specific group of people, which if your face didn't fit, you'd be alienated by. Or there was salon brands that had a bit of a sideline in frizz, for example. Or there was natural brands which, you know, might be very good for you and very good for the environment, but actually made your hair feel like a haystack. So we actually couldn't really find the products that would be really high performance, and it's really important to be high performance in hair because people know instantly if it works, and that didn't compromise on the health of your hair or your kind of ethical credentials, you know, vegan, cruelty-free, no nasty ingredients, that kind of thing. So we had, at that time, just planned on being like a kind of content creators. We started a YouTube channel and an Instagram account and just started sharing tips and tricks about how to care for curly and wavy hair, recipes, stuff you could make in your kitchen, because a lot of people were makeshifting hair products, hair masks, because they couldn't find stuff that was really nourishing. So we just started sharing that stuff and found that the audience was gravitating towards us, because if you were a girl with curly, wavy hair in 2018, you couldn't turn on the TV and see an advert with a girl with your hair texture, unless it was a before picture, which is quite offensive. Frizz is not actually a hair type. If you have frizzy hair, anyone listening, this is curl potential. Let me help you. So yeah, it was just a few factors coming together. My husband at that time, for whatever reason, decided to grow his hair out, found that he had textured hair that he had no idea how to manage. And he started trying products. He initially started with men's hair gels, and that really wasn't the thing. And he didn't particularly want to buy women's products. So given that he's a product guy and that is his whole background, working in big corporate beauty brands, he was like, I'm going to make this, I'm going to do this. And we worked really heavily with our community of pretty much micro-influencers, people that were really engaged in that category, who were educators or looking to be educated about how to care for their hair type. And they pretty much helped us develop everything in the brand, from the initial product lineup to the ingredients, what was in it, what wasn't in it, what it would do. And they ultimately helped us launch the brand. So they felt like they had a part in creating the brand. So they felt like they owned it. So we were lucky that we launched at a time when you could do things on Instagram without paying a penny and people would see it. The climate has changed now. The environment's changed. But it was very much a community-oriented brand. We were never like the faces of the brand. We didn't go down that route.
And would love your reflections on that piece of people who are thinking about starting to build that community now, because I think I get really excited about community powered businesses. I think they're amazing. To your point, I think it's becoming harder to do, certainly on the kind of channels that we've heard people do them on, like Instagram, because it's really hard to get in front of people. What would be some of your tips to someone who is thinking about building a consumer facing brand? Would you still today start with community? Would you do something different? What are your thoughts there?
I think I still would start with community, because I think as much as being a source of customers, it's a source of insight. And because my background is research, I'm obsessed with understanding the user. And they are the people that are going to tell you what annoys them about what the current products, what annoys them about your products, how they're using products now and what's missing and what's going wrong. And funnily enough, the years that I did customer service, you do all the roles when you're a startup founder, but the years I did customer service I found really useful because I was at the coalface of knowing what we needed to change, what we needed to develop next and that kind of thing. So I think just finding your tribe, finding your people, even if you start small, is still the way I would go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about product creation? What were some of your learnings there? Because I feel like for a lot of people, you might understand the problem in a space, but knowing where to begin with actually creating a physical product is quite a maze for people, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a long process and we were very obsessed, particularly me, with product. I think we probably ended up with about 20 or 30 iterations of each formula. I think a good place to start is benchmarks. So looking for which are the best sellers in competitor lines and looking what's in there and how you might make something similar and ideally better. So that's a good place to start. And it depends really on your category. I mean, like I said earlier, in haircare, unlike some other beauty categories, people know instantly if it's going to work for them. You could use an anti-aging skincare brand and not know if it's worked for 20 years. But with haircare, you know straight away if it looks good, if it's worked well. So we had to be really tough on the formulas and we sent a lot back and we took a lot of time. We also worked with our community on that, though. So we had a panel of, we call them Curl Friends, that we sent out every sample to, and they would give us feedback on the formulas before they were launched. So we tested them on lots of different types of hair textures and found out how they worked and who they worked best for. And sometimes we found this works great for wavy hair. This isn't so good for coily hair, afro hair, or whatever it is. So yeah, it's a long process. We didn't start in the kitchen as most people assume. Because we did know how the process worked in corporate, we always planned to do it on quite a big scale. We were really ambitious. So we always had a formulator and a contract manufacturer from the get-go. And I think that's good because if you develop something in your kitchen, you're not doing the kind of stability tests, the safety tests. It isn't really, as soon as you create something at scale, formulas change. And even going from having a small batch of samples in your laboratory to a big contract manufacturer, things change. And in the beginning, we had whole batches just go bad when we tried to scale up. So that's really devastating when you've invested your hard-earned, very little capital in it.
Which leads me on to my other question. How are you funding it at this point? And how much kind of rough quantums of cash is this costing to get to a first product you can actually sell?
Well, less than you might think. So I think for the first 3 years we operated and launched the whole brand, including launching into US retail in about 1,200 stores, on a total of about £70,000 of seed funding from a very generous early angel investor.
Okay.
So we really honestly took the lean startup to the nth degree, probably for too long and to a fault, to be honest, which we'll talk about my learnings and what I would do differently. But yeah, we really were lean. We really just invested everything back into the business and really did everything ourselves, did it all the flipping hard way, honestly. Now I think I'd outsource a little bit more if I could. But yeah, I think we spent most of our initial seed funding on developing the product. We were not the kind of founders that had anybody in our circle that had any money. There was no friends and family around. It was, okay, we'll use up our savings. I was continuing to freelance as a brand consultant to basically pay the bills on the side and just doing a bit of both. Mihai was full-time, so he didn't have any income for quite a few years. The business didn't pay either of us for quite a few years. So it's really difficult when you don't come from money to take that leap. 100%. And while everything is better when you go all in and you don't try to do it as a side hustle and hope that it takes off, which it hardly ever does if you're not able to give it loads of time, that's easier said than done when you've got bills to pay. That's the beauty of us being co-founders and having two of us, that he could fully focus, and he really did spend all of his time on Curlsmith, and I was able to spend half of my time bringing home the bacon and also working with amazing, brilliant brands and clients, which I enjoyed.
And I do think one of the things that we often try and encourage founders to think about, is there something you could be doing that actually does take off that financial pressure if you've reached a point where it's just not maintainable otherwise? Because I think I see so many founders who, to your point, I totally agree, that focus, that passion you can put in if you can go on it full time, unparalleled.
Yeah.
But actually, like, how realistic is that for most people to be able to pay yourself nothing for years? And actually, what you sacrifice is often having to spend a lot of your time fundraising or giving up huge amounts of equity too early. So I actually love the approach you took of how can we, between us, as a co-founding couple, bootstrap this in the early days.
Yeah.
And so how long did was the product formulation getting that approved? Was that the 3 years, or where does that finish in that 3-year process?
No, I think we probably wrapped it up from conception of what the products were going to be probably within a year, maybe a little bit less. So quite quick compared to the timelines that you see in corporate beauty brands, which I guess is an advantage for startups as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how do you then go about getting it to market, right? You've got this product. Obviously, luckily you have some knowledge in this space, but what did you do next?
We were lucky that we had a fairly warm community, albeit, not huge. I think we had about 10,000 people following us on Instagram when we launched the product line. So we had a warm community, a small but engaged community, which is always, I think it's always better to have quality, not quantity. And we were in a really specific space. I think having a name like Curlsmith, targeting a specific hair type was at times a restriction, but most of the time really liberating, because anybody that's following an account about how to look after curly hair probably is your audience.
Yeah.
At the time, there was huge buzz about being D2C and being purely digital, right? So we were like, oh, we're just going to be a pure digital brand. You keep all of the margins, et cetera, very purist. However, neither of us have a background in that area, and we didn't have the money to pay someone who did. So that was a bit of a disadvantage. And also, it depends on the price of your items, but not everybody wanted to go on a website and spend £20 on one bottle of shampoo, for example. So we fairly quickly realised that actually we might be better served as a retail brand, that actually that could be a really efficient way of getting to a larger number of people and getting our brand discovered. So while we did start as D2C, Michał spent a lot of time. He's brilliantly shameless in that he will just keep phoning and emailing people until they take his call. So he was doing that with retailers all around the world. And the first one to bite, which ended up being a brilliant partner, was Ulta Beauty in the States. At the time, they had about 1,200 stores. I think they put us online for a few months and it went really well. So we went into all doors overnight, which was cool but stressful. And I think that year only Kylie Jenner's beauty brand did the same, that they didn't just test in 200 stores. They were like all in, all at the same time. And that was only about a year or less into our whole project. So that was kind of a hockey stick moment for us.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in beauty, people want to see your product. They want to touch it, smell it. The first thing someone does if you hand them a beauty product is like open it, sniff it, right? So I think that really aided brand discovery. And having a trusted retailer stock you, it just shortcuts the process of like, do I trust this? Is this going to be good for me? Is it legit kind of thing? So it worked well for us. I think by the end we were about 50-50. D2C and retail, but in the start there was times when we were more retail oriented.
And I remember writing years ago, I worked in a venture studio, and I also love the beauty space. Just, if there's any beauty startup I want to try it, my friends are constantly laughing at me being like, I found a new way to do eyelashes. Yeah. Anyway, and I was reading about the direct-to-consumer trend, and I was looking at it, and it probably was actually 2018, maybe 2019. And I remember just looking at it and thinking there's been so much buzz about D2C. And increasingly, we're seeing the later stage, every single later stage beauty, personal care, startup, Harry's, every razor, they're going into stores. Everyone who'd done the D2C then does reach a point where you go, well, we need the retail arm as well. So your point of we ended up being both, it just sounds like you got there faster than a lot of people in the D2C space.
Maybe. Yeah. And I think it's tempting to spend all your money on a website and think if we build it, they will come. They will not come. You have to drive them to the website. And that's a huge investment. So I think a lot of founders in the beauty space are scared off by the margins that retailers take. But I think the advantages outweigh giving away a bit of margin.
And it was also really so powerful that, as you said, it was a really engaged audience. You'd already built 10,000 for a startup. It's amazing to have pre-launch, right? And actually to know that they're already bought into the brand and have the trust. If anyone's thinking about going through this process of formulation, I love the idea that you started with this education piece, built that real brand where they know you and love you. And as you said, are kind of pre-qualified of if you're interested in this content, you're going to be interested in the product. That's also a really powerful path for founders, I think, who are thinking, well, how do we get started? How do we get to market?
Yeah, exactly. And I think we were lucky that we were in a space where there weren't that many brands. There were definitely not many very good quality products that did the performance and no compromise on hair health. And women are eminently unsatisfied with their hair, particularly women with curly, wavy textured hair. We ended up growing the category, we found that a lot of our customers, they'd never bought a specialist curly or wavy hair brand before. They hadn't realised they had any kind of hair texture. They thought they had bad hair. They thought they had frizzy hair. It was so satisfying. That was for me my purpose, that you could take someone who was like, help, I've just got really bad hair. There's nothing that can be done. And it's like, actually, there is no such thing as bad hair. There's just bad hair care. We can help you. We've got the right products. We're going to educate you on the techniques to get the best so that everybody can love the hair they have.
Love it. I remember growing up and genuinely thinking my hair type was frizzy. So
Are you wavy or are you more curly?
I'm kind of in between. I'm a wavy curl.
Yeah.
The more I've heat treated it, the less
curly
it's become.
Depends on any given day and any given weather, right?
Yeah, literally. So that angel investor, I just want to come back to briefly. How did you meet them?
How did you get there?
Yeah.
Well, it was a long process. Like I said, we didn't know anyone that had money.
Yeah.
And we were racking our brains. We were like, who do we start with? And the only person I knew who'd had any modicum of success was my former CEO of brand consultancy I was working at called Clear. They're now part of M&C Saatchi Group. And they had sold to M&C Saatchi. So I was like, that's the only person I know who's had any kind of business that they sold. So I was like, can you meet up with us? Can you give us some advice or whatever? And I think he ended up introducing us to someone who introduced us to someone, and about 7 guys down the line, that was the guy. So they talk about your second degree network. I think it was probably 7th for us before we got any money.
Yep.
And then once you've got one angel investor, then they'll tell their friends and their networks, and there's kind of that endorsement effect. So then we managed to get a couple of investors, very small amounts of money initially. But that's kind of all we needed. And even though we would have definitely taken more money, we did try and we were refused. It turned out to be the right thing to do in many ways, and definitely being really tight ensured our survival in the first couple of tough years.
And do you take money? Do you fundraise again later? Do you keep growing on the revenue? What's been your path there?
I think probably it could have been self-sustaining, but like I said, we were very ambitious. We wanted to grow really quickly. So we did take VC money probably about 3 years in, and then really close to exit, we also, about a year before exit, we took on another VC. We had great VC partners that were really supportive and really helpful. I know that's not always the case.
What was some of that? Because I spend a lot of time telling people not to think of VC as a be all and end all. I think people think I'm anti-VC. I'm definitely not. I think there are some amazing ones out there. What were some of the ways that they did help and support? Because I think, to your point, it's nice to hear some of the happy stories as well.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't even bother approaching a VC unless you're turning over 2 million, because they will entertain you and not be, and they'll be like, yeah, but of course, come back to us when you're making 2 million. They do like to date early stage startup founders so that they know about you down the line. And I get why that happens, but it's also very disheartening.
Yeah. To your point, it's a good idea to see it as like you're getting on their radar around before you want to be able to raise from them.
Yeah.
They're going to look at you for a year and see how you perform against what you said you do. They're definitely watching and waiting.
Yeah.
But don't expect them to back you early. There are early stage VC funds, not a huge number that will, but look at the ticket sizes they write, look at the other companies they've invested and how much revenue they're doing. And yeah, don't waste your time thinking someone's going to fund you who's actually waiting for the next round.
That's it. That's exactly it. So we were lucky we had done the rounds and people were aware of us, but watching us, I think. So down the line, it was easier. But yeah, I think the best thing that our VCs did was not interfere too much. And not act like a boss, not make us accountable. I think they were very grown up in the sense of, would I rather my founders that I've invested in spend their time writing a really detailed update for me, or would I rather them spend their time growing the business? And they were very much in that camp. And they were there when we wanted advice and help and support, but they weren't there when we didn't have the time, basically.
What were some things you went to them for?
Contacts mostly. So do you know someone who knows about entering into this market, or do you know, I don't know, someone a consultant that can help us on this specific thing? So they have a really good network. And also they'll introduce you to if they're open, other founders. And that is a really big source of support for startup founders, something that we didn't invest enough in the first time, and that next time we would definitely be in a much better position, because we have spent the last year or two since exit meeting a lot of brilliant founders and thinking, I really wish I knew you before.
What do you think that would have done for you tangibly? Because I totally agree with the point. I think it's such a delta between who does and doesn't succeed.
I think there's practical things. So now we have a great network of founders and we can say, do you know someone who manufactures X in the X country? So practical help and support. But it's more about the emotional side. You talk about this a lot on this podcast, but the toll running a startup has on your mental health is intense. It is a very intense process, and it can be very isolating. You can feel very alone, especially when very few people around you were doing the same thing. So none of our friends and family were doing anything like this. They didn't understand it. Sometimes they'd be even quite negative, like, why are you carrying on? You're not making any money. How long are you going to keep trying for? It's not very motivating. People who are in your same boat get it. They get how long it takes and how hard it is, and how you can't be at every birthday, christening and drinks event and it's not personal, you know?
What was the process like doing this with your husband? As you're talking about this, it strikes me that it's probably a great side to the coin and a terrible side. Of the great side of, at least, you know, the person you're with really gets it. Downside is actually it's quite a bubble to be in together potentially, and you kind of can't come home from work and go, oh, I'm going to forget about my day.
Yeah.
So what was that process like?
It's so funny because I think people always expect me to say it was terrible, and a lot of founders do, but it was great, but for a few key reasons. I think if we'd have tried to be co-CEOs, that would have been bad times, because we have very different philosophies, ways of working, very, very different personalities and everything. So I think if we were both trying to make decisions together, we would have clashed. But Michał was always the CEO. He was the boss. He was driving the vision. He was growth. And I was team, basically. I was a very involved, passionate team member, plugging whatever gaps we had at the time. We need a label written. We need some copy for the website. We need a brand positioning. We need a deck on this. That was me, but I wasn't calling all the shots. And I think that worked well, particularly because I wasn't full-time in the business until towards the end. Yeah. So I couldn't have been the one steering the ship. So I think that's why it worked well. We never tried to overlap in terms of who was doing what. So we had quite clear division of labour. And when the team got bigger, I would go through weeks and never come across him in a work capacity, only in a home capacity. And I think the best thing is there were times when I was fully into the business, which was more towards the end, and there were times when I was fully out because I had a baby in the middle of this whole thing. And the times when I was fully in, we got on better because we had a better understanding. It wasn't a case of he's come home in a really bad mood and I don't know why and he doesn't want to talk about it. It was, I know exactly what's gone down today. Yeah. I know the context of this. I get it, and I'm going to give you some leeway, but us both some leeway. And the empathy was just there. So I think it was actually better. The more we were both in it, the better it was.
You mentioned having a baby mid-startup. Yeah. I'm so curious about this, not before anyone gets excited for any personal reasons incoming. Calm yourselves. But because I genuinely think it's really hard to be a female founder with the kid thing. And a lot of, and we're going to come on to I suspect we'll pull on some similar threads. We're going to come on to the kind of 30-year-old crisis lots of women go through and identity, and often it's quite tied into fertility. And I think there is this thing I definitely see with the female founder community of this question of, for those who haven't done it yet, well, like, where on earth would that fit? Like, how would that literally work? So would love to just hear more about your experience with that piece.
Yeah, I think it's funny because there's a bit of a myth that startup founders are in their 20s and like these boys in Silicon Valley wearing hoodies. Most founders, especially successful ones, are in their 30s and 40s. That's also the time when you're building a family and building houses and doing all these other life things. So, and we weren't going to have kids. We were very focused on this and our careers in general. But I kind of got to 35 and thought, I'm getting to a bit of a now or never situation. It is a terrible time in the business. We don't have any money. We're living in a damp flat in London where the door bangs and wakes us up all the way through the night. This is not an ideal scenario, but, you know, it might take time and it's a bit of a now or never. So we went for it anyway, and it turned out to be relatively dramatic because halfway through the pregnancy, I was like, I need to be near my mum. I need help. I can't do it all without my mum. So we moved back to the Midlands, and then I gave birth the day we got the keys to the house, didn't manage to unpack before we went to the hospital, just like terrible. He was still working and living in London, and he'd only been back for 24 hours when it all kicked off. So we had no time to like get organised. It was the opposite of the nursery's ready, the clothes are all packed away. It was the opposite of that. It was hectic, as you like. But even so, even despite the drama, the year after was probably the hardest year of our lives. in one way was good because it corresponded with a time when Curlsmith was really booming. It was really exploding at that point. Having not been able to take a decent income from it, finally he was able to draw an income and I had zero income overnight. So that was good. But from all other respects, I had to step away from the business because COVID hit 2 months after my daughter was born. So there was no childcare, there was no mum coming in to help me. I couldn't really go back into the business for much longer than I planned. So he was just going it solo. I think we had 1 or 2 team members at this point. We really didn't have many people to be doing a multi-million revenue business. We probably should have hired sooner, to my earlier point. So that was really tough because I had to full on be a mum for the best part of a year and he had to full on lead the whole business on his own. And both of us were on our own kind of private hells, really. When lockdown lifted and everything, things got easier. But yeah, I mean, on one hand, I would say I don't recommend it, but on the other hand, it's never a good time. And if it's something you want, you shouldn't deprioritize it if it's going to be something that you come to regret later in life. So yeah, it's funny though. I mean, I've heard you talk about this before, but we did have investment meetings. They'll look at us, they'll be husband and wife team, and they'll be like, I hope you're not planning on having a baby. One of them said, the worst thing you could do now is have a baby. Me 6 months later having a baby. So yeah, it's not great timing, but I just don't think business isn't everything. And at the end of your life, if you're going to regret not doing it, I think that needs to be a priority. You have to make it work. It's also a great reason to have co-founders that can kind of carry the weight while you step away for a bit in whatever way that you need to, which you do have to step away. I did meet a founder the other day who literally went back to her business the day after giving birth. And I was like, that is just not human.
I know. No. I actually put it on LinkedIn as a question a while ago, and a load of founders just came back and kind of just said, yeah, you have about 6 weeks maternity tops. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound like that's doable.
It's not great. I mean, even though I was like, I'm saying I stepped away, I acutely remember being about 4 hours after giving birth in the hospital, replying to customer queries and replying to like questions on Instagram and like my order's gone missing and whatever. And I'm like, this isn't sensible. Yeah. If I had a real job in an office or something, this wouldn't be happening. So yeah, it's really tough.
So I took us down a rabbit hole there, but coming back to the business, so you do come back after having a baby and as you say, it's growing and reaching really exciting scale to the point where you've managed to raise VC a couple of times. Are you thinking about exit at this point? Are you planning to sell the company at some point? What were your thoughts on that?
I think as soon as you do start talking to VCs and certainly take VC money, you have to bake an exit strategy into the plan. So when we took on our first VC, they said, obviously the plan is you're going to be out within 5 years. And I was like, okay, time's ticking. So yes, we were planning, not in a practical way, but mentally for that. It's weird. I can so clearly remember the journey and the struggle to the first, let's say, 1 million that we turned over. But from 1 to 35, I couldn't honestly tell you. We were just getting swept up. Honestly, it's like a blur, just really busy and really hectic. We didn't do any of that celebrating the small wins or any kind of wins along the way. We were just on to the next thing, what's next. And that's maybe another thing I do differently next time as well. But yeah, in terms of lessons, gosh, I really don't know. I went into an agency the other day and they were like, tell us about how to grow a brand. And I was like, this is how to grow a brand, aka all the good advice we didn't take. We got given consistently the same advice and most of it we ignored. So you'll be told by potential investors or advisors or whatever often, win in your home market first. Start small and then grow slowly. Things like that. And we were like, right, so we're just going to go after America and we're going to go after the biggest haircare retailer in America. Yeah, let's do that. And it was partly ambition, but it was partly efficiency. Because we were like, we could try to peddle this to every little tiny small independent shop and salon in the UK, but we haven't got time to service all those customers. It's much more efficient if we get one big fish and we put our energy into that. So we, landed that really big retailer, and that was a great hockey stick moment for us. So I think don't be unambitious. Don't be put off by unfamiliar markets. There's always ways to do it, and it's easier than you might think to break America, particularly if, like us, you are playing in a category that's much more established over there. I think I came into this, especially as a brand consultant and in ex-advertising, with a very idealistic point of view about disrupting the category. And as a small startup with no budget and no awareness, you can't disrupt shit. Excuse my French. If you're L'Oreal with $1 million budgets, you can create new categories. You can really have a huge impact. But if you're smaller, it's much better to go after a small piece of a big pie than try to create a pie from scratch in a market. And the market for curly hair, the category, is only just starting to grow in the UK now. If we'd have waited for Boots, we'd have waited till 2 weeks ago and we would have died way before then, because we're in Boots now, just about. So yeah, I think don't be afraid to go big or go home was always our mantra.
I'm presuming that was a big part of getting VCs to buy into the big vision, right? Because one of the things that I think is really hard, as you said, I think startups get a bit confused by what feels like contradictory advice of go after a niche, start small, grow, but also tell us how this is going to be $1 billion company in 10 years. So what were some of your lessons kind of pitching to VCs about what didn't work with them?
Gosh, I mean, it depends what stage you're at. At the beginning, you haven't got the numbers. I mean, basically, they just want you to show the numbers, that you're making a lot of money, that you're growing really fast, that you're getting traction. But you're not going to have that in the early stages. And so it becomes all about the founders. And that was really difficult for us because we had so many very upsetting meetings where they'd be like, yeah, we don't expect you to be making millions of pounds. So it's all about the founders. So we would be investing in you, but we don't like you. Or they'd be very
actually say that.
in as many words.
Yeah.
They didn't find us charismatic. We were not good looking enough. What's that funny accent? I don't think people will get this. Yeah, it gets really personal. It is personal. I mean, angel investors, early stage seed funders, they look at you, they're investing in you, and that can be a great thing. But I think they often look for the wrong things. I do some angel investing now and I look for very different things. I ask very different questions than I was asked. And who knows if they'll pan out. Yeah, I just think, I don't know, often people are looking for people that are just like them.
Yeah.
And, my husband is an immigrant. He's got what he calls a Dracula accent. He'd walk into a meeting with a very British ex-Oxbridge, I know you are as well, kind of VC guy or investor. We are the worst. No, you're the best as well.
No, it is genuinely, Oxbridge graduates are the worst for this kind of, which college do you go to? Immediate bonding. I genuinely think it's really dangerous in the ecosystem. I'm sometimes guilty of it, but it is really bad.
Yeah, and I know you're super aware of it and you've got whole projects on this whole thing, but I think they just didn't get us, and I wish they'd have seen through it to I love that immigrant mentality of, this has to work. I've got no fallback plan. I've already moved my whole life for this. This will work. Yeah. That grit that I don't have. I think we would not have been successful without Mihaw's background, his grit, really, because I'm much more fluffy and much more sensitive. I think I've become incredibly resilient through that process. But yeah, it was that they didn't necessarily always see in the beginning.
Which
sod if you're a charismatic person, are you going to get things done?
Well, and on the immigrant point, that there are one of the things I get ranty about lots, but one of the things that drives me really mad is they kind of go, oh, well, we're pattern matching, so investing. Like, the stats are very clear that immigrant founders are far and away the most successful category. Yeah. And actually, if you wanted a pattern match, that's where you'd go. But to your point, the bias sits elsewhere. Yeah. And it's much nicer to imagine that someone who looks like me, sounds like me, is going to be successful because it maybe makes me think I'm successful.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Affinity bias is, I think, one of the biggest issues still in the startup space. But
yes.
I shan't rant too long. And you mentioned before that you were getting these comments about being a husband and wife team. I have founder friends who are in couples, some of whom have declared this, some of whom don't lead with it, would never lie about it, but definitely don't advertise it. Did all your investors you were approaching know you were married? Did you make that part of the story? What was that bit like?
We didn't make it part of the story. I don't think we ever hid it. They used to ask. They used to be like, are you guys together or what's the vibe here? So yeah, we'd just be very open about it. I see it as a strength. I think if a co-founder is someone who isn't quite as invested in keeping the relationship together, that can be more challenging sometimes, Yeah. When you are married and you're co-founders, you try harder. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Love that. Were there any anything you did as a co-founding pair that maybe you did because you were married, but actually might be a great exercise or a great thing for a non-married, non-dating co-founder pair to do, to keep, to your point, keep investing in the relationship, keep it in the times that are hard?
Yeah, investing in the relationship probably didn't happen for a few years, in all honesty. And that's tough when you just don't see each other. So I'm not sure I can give great relationship advice, but the main advice is just be really clear. Don't try and do everything together. Be really clear about each other's kind of roles and responsibilities and clearly divide that out, so, for efficiency, but also so you're not doubling up and you're not like, just trust the other person to do what they're good at and trust yourself to do what you're good at, and combine them together rather than trying to be everything together, I would say.
Any other lessons? You mentioned that you were very much team.
Yeah.
Any other lessons on, like, as you're growing the company, what are some of the mistakes maybe you guys made with how you grew the team, how you supported the team, or just things that you got right, maybe more intuitively?
Yeah. I mean, the things that we got right at the beginning but didn't serve us as well later on was being really tight, like lean startup to the nth degree, as I mentioned earlier. We were not hiring enough people soon enough, and that's why it took such a toll on us personally. We could have afforded to hire people sooner. We should have. We were so afraid of losing the little money we had that we didn't invest it in growing the team and did it all ourselves instead. So yeah, we definitely hire more people sooner. I think one thing we got right, and people often ask us, who were your first hires and would you recommend that? We hired a fairly junior all-rounder, was our employee number one, and she was brilliant. She was very passionate about the category. She could do a little bit of everything. And that's kind of what you need. You don't want someone who will only do one type of thing, because it's not just one type of thing when you're a small team. And you don't want someone who's going to come in and say, right, to do my job, I need to hire 10 other people, because you can't afford those 10 other people. Yeah. So I think some founders I've seen make the mistake of hiring people that are too senior. And one thing that I do next time is maybe be less concerned with what category experience somebody has and more concerned with what kind of businesses they'd worked in. So anybody that's got startup experience gets the vibe. And if they're up for that vibe, they're your kind of person. Anyone that, if their 5-year plan is, I want to start my own beauty brand, great. That is the kind of person you want, because they're up for learning, they're up for trying stuff. And any aspiring entrepreneur, I would definitely recommend go and work in a startup, learn the ways, because you cannot learn the ways of a beauty startup by working for L'Oreal. It is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Love that. And so the team keeps growing, the business keeps growing. You do get this exit event. Can you talk to us about that? Because I think, again, it's something founders just don't hear enough about. How did that process happen? How did you find someone to buy the company?
It's often a misconception. People are like, oh, right, so did someone just like phone you up one day and say, I want to buy your company?
I genuinely think that's how everyone thinks it happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. It's akin to, it's the closest thing I can describe to buying a house. So you want to put your house on the market. So you have to get it all tidy and organised, and then you start showing people around, and you get a broker involved, and you get a pool of people who might be interested in buying that house, and then you get some offers, some of which you accept, some which you reject, and you whittle it down. That's kind of how it works. We thought we could do it on our own initially, but quickly realised you do need some kind of broker to guide you through the process and have the contacts and make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. But it is, I think the process took almost a year from being officially on the market to exiting. And another thing people don't realise is a lot of brands are on the market and they never sell.
Yeah.
So we know several founders that have tried more than one time to sell. So it's not a given. Even if you're successful, it's not a given. Even if you're successful on the surface, the boring details can undo a deal. Have you got all your paperwork? Have you got your intellectual property is the main one for our category. It's easy to rush into a relationship with a contract manufacturer where they have the intellectual property and they're not going to give it to you, or it's going to be very expensive or difficult to get hold of it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that makes deals fall apart. So yeah, I think just having your ducks in a row. And I think if we did it again, we'd definitely be more set up from the get-go. I think when you're scrappy and you're growing really quickly and you're so busy, you don't necessarily go about things in the most organised way. And then suddenly it's like, right, have you got that contract from 5 years ago? And you're like, better go get that. Better go write a policy on X, Y, and Z. So it's a job on top of a job. It's a huge amount of work. to sell a company.
Was there anything else that surprised you in that journey that you wouldn't have known if you hadn't been through that process?
Probably loads of things. I think it's not a given. People can drop out at any time. The price will be constantly renegotiated throughout the process.
Right.
So the initial offer may not end up being the actual offer. And, there's loads of different types of deals. So it depends who you're selling to. Most deals involve the founders staying on for a certain amount of years. We wanted to exit, and we were fortunate that we got an offer which matched up with our expectations. So we were able to exit. But I think founders often bake themselves so into the brand. They're often the face of the brand. They're the name of the brand. They are the brand. And while that is amazing, especially if you've got a really good personal brand and you're really high profile, it can make it a lot harder to step away.
Yeah.
We had our community as the face of our brand, not us. And that was one of the reasons that helped us be able to separate from it.
What was that process like for you just personally? You mentioned that you wanted to exit.
Yeah.
Did it feel great and amazing when it was done? Was it mixed? What was the emotional feeling of
It's funny. I mean, people ask me this all the time. They say, oh, does it feel like you've won the lottery? Absolutely not. You'll be aware of the arrival fallacy, this deep-rooted belief that as soon as we reach our goals, life will be complete and we'll be happy. The reality of reaching a massive milestone event that you fantasized about for years is that it can be quite an anticlimax.
Yeah.
And for us, we sold to an American corporation, and we got a very kind of robotic call about 10 o'clock at night, which was well past my bedtime, saying pretty much the deal is done. And that was it. And we were like, okay. And then our broker phoned us up and was a little bit more woo. But it was 10:30 at night. I had a little baby who didn't sleep, and I knew would be up at 4:30 in the morning. So it wasn't champagne corks. It was like, right, should we just go to bed then? We did phone my husband's dad, and he said, oh, gosh, so you guys are both unemployed now then? Like, he was actually worried. So that's quite funny.
That's adorable.
Yeah. So it was quite a shock. It doesn't feel real for quite a long time. There definitely was a feeling of relief because we'd been living under such huge stress for a number of years. But yeah, it's also when your whole purpose in life is taken away, it's quite a shock, especially because we left really abruptly. And that was one bit that I found difficult because while our senior leadership team were aware of the process that was going on and they were involved in it, the rest of our team weren't. And I felt sad that I couldn't really talk them through it and the implications. And we didn't know what was going to happen and how the business was going to be managed from then on necessarily. So that was tough, that part.
And is it, because you mentioned earlier, nearly in Boots now, it feels like you've still got the sense of the us.
Yeah.
Has that been kind of easy to keep watching it grow from a little bit of a distance? How's that been?
Well, I tried not to look at, I don't think I looked at anything for a year. And I was like, unfollow, I just don't want to know what they're doing because if I like it or if I don't like it, it's not mine anymore.
Yeah.
Now I look and I think with detached pride, I'm really glad. Like, I want to see the brand succeed. I don't want it to dissolve or whatever. So I was really pleased when I saw it was finally in Boots. I think that was probably my mum's proudest moment, even though we've been in retailers in the States for years. But yeah, I'm really proud of it. And I'm proud of the team that are taking it forward as well.
I love it. And obviously since then, you've got your latest project, which is very exciting. You've written a book.
Well, writing, but in the process.
How far through the draft are we?
Oh, gosh. Well, it's been quite a different process than I expected, to be honest. Yeah, it's one of those things you always think, what would I do if money was no object? How would I spend my time? And it isn't watching Netflix. I always wanted to write, and writing has always been a feature of all the jobs I've ever had. And I knew that there'd be no money in it, so I didn't pursue it before now. So yeah, I was like, I'm going to write a book, and it was going to be a fiction book. And then a friend she sent me a text really early in the morning one day and was like, I see you writing a self-help book, Kate. It's non-fiction, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, you might be right, actually. And I chose not to make it easy and write about business. There's enough books about that. I was tempted to write about the shock of motherhood, but there's enough books about that as well. And I was looking at the pivot points in my life, and it took me back to a time when I was in my 20s when life was so uncertain. And just reflecting now, I just turned 40. How my life is now is worlds apart from how my life was 10 years ago. And yet when I was in my 20s, I was flailing. I had this feeling like I'm falling behind, I'm missing out, I'm behind all my friends, I don't know where I'm going. I had a complete quarter life crisis. I wasn't where I wanted to be in my job, my relationship. I was like, I want to be getting engaged. Where's this ring? issued a very uncool girl ultimatum to Mihal, which he refused, sending me into meltdown. But as a result of reaching that rock bottom of like, none of my ducks in a row, I haven't got any of my shit together, I was like, okay, stop for a sec. I moved to Australia for a few months, which was really good, and had a bit of a break from everything, and was like, hang on, where's all this coming from? Like, why do I have it in my head that I need to have a business by 30 and be a millionaire and be married and have a child and have all this? Where is this coming from? And is this actually anything that I want anyway?
Yeah.
And I had this moment of realization of, actually, if I would have done all that, if I would have got married and started a family at 29, none of the things that I actually wanted to achieve in life would necessarily happen. My priorities were actually not settling down and having a family. They were traveling the world, living in different countries, starting a business. None of that is actually compatible with settling down. And being very settled and very stuck is the thing that makes me least happy. And being free and having lots of adventures and not knowing what's around the corner, that is what makes me happy. So I just absorbed all these societal norms and expectations that were actually not my own internal wants and needs. So I had that moment of like, stop looking out, start looking in and figure out a new path. And it's definitely not the path that I thought I was on. It's a better one. So my whole approach with the book is working with women who are in their 20s who feel like they're failing because they haven't ticked all those boxes that society expects of them, and helping them reevaluate, actually, where do these boxes come from? Is that even what you want? And how do we move forward, overcome this anxiety? Because the truth that all of us over 30 know is 30 is not the deadline. There is no bomb that goes off at 30 if you're not married and you don't have a 6-figure salary in your bank account. It is just the beginning. Like, life only gets better after 30. All my greatest hits. If the clock really stopped at 30, I never would have started Curlsmith, scaled and sold a business and become financially independent and secure. I never would have got married. I never would have become a mother. I never would have lived in different countries. I never would have had the life that I wanted if I would have settled and tried to rush all of those life milestones in my 20s. When, let's face it, you're only talking about a couple of years here after you finish education, if that's the route you go down. You're trying to establish a career. How are you supposed to, in parallel to that, establish a really strong relationship, a family, do all your experimenting and adventuring? You can't do it all. You can, but not all in a couple of years and not all at the same time. You've got your whole life. You have got time and you are doing fine, however it feels. So I just wanted to bring that message to the next generation of women in their 20s who are failing or flailing or feel like they are, just to reassure that they've got more time than they think. And these deadlines and these timelines are fake. I'm exposing all those milestone myths and in the process, like, meeting some brilliant people. But it's turned out to be quite a different process than I thought. I thought, I'm going to sit down for 3 months and blast this thing out, and then I'll get a publishing deal and that will be done and it'll be wrapped up. It's been quite the opposite because, like I said before, when we built Curlsmith, we did the opposite of build in public. We suffered in secret. And I don't want to do that again with anything. I wanted to build in public this book. It's ended up being more like a project, I would call it, and a community, or particularly on Instagram. And that has been so rewarding because it's been like I've been writing the book live in real time. I can put out a poll to my Instagram followers and use that data to go into my book. Or I've used it to attract in the kind of experts that I want to collaborate with on the book. So I've now interviewed 35 plus and still growing experts in the space of mental health, mindset, matrescence, name the kind of area of life that might be, financial health experts, everything that affects women in their 20s. And I've been able to pack all of that expert advice into the book. And if I hadn't built the community and built in public in parallel to trying to write in my corner office, that never would have happened. And new opportunities that I didn't expect have come off the back of that. No publishing deal as yet, but that's okay. That's all right. And with nonfiction anyway, you don't have to build the whole thing. You don't have to write the whole thing before you pitch it to agents, publishers, if you go down the traditional route. So it's probably about a third written, fully drafted. Yeah, I'm just kind of relaxing into it because I thought it was quite funny that even though my whole book is about letting go of false deadlines, I had given myself the deadline of publishing it by the time I was 40.
Brilliant.
And I was like, you need to live your own message here, missus. So that's quite convenient for me. But I also met a number of very successful published authors, and they were like, you need to add 1 to 2 years to that timeline, Kate. So now I'm trying to relax into the process of it is going to take time, and I'm doing fine.
And I love, again, that thread of you're building a community as you're doing it.
I can't help it.
You're not waiting for this audience to kind of arrive. I think lots of people think, I'll write a book and they will read it. I'll build a business and they will come. Actually, you're practicing exactly what you preached the first time around. I love that.
I see it so much with first-time founders where they're very protective about their idea. And the thing is, you can't steal an idea. And even if you did, the way you execute it, that is where the success is. So what you find, and now we have a really good network of established founders and successful exited founders. And what always strikes me is they're so generous with what they share and they're so open. And I love that because I'm TMD all over. But they all are enlightened enough to know that I'm not going to steal your idea. Even if I did, I wouldn't be able to execute it the way you can. I don't have that, it all set up that way. So it's quite funny. And that's another reason why I think people are protective about writing their books. But funnily enough, just yesterday, I saw that someone who is very well established in this space of self-help, particularly the 20-somethings audience, is launching a book that's very close to the book I'm working on. But I'm like, it's okay, because that happened to us so many times in Curlsmith. We'd be like, oh my God, this brand with loads of funding is launching something for curly hair or something that looks really similar to us. We even went to meetings where we were like, I don't know how to put it politely, where they steal your idea and they do it. But none of that actually impeded our success in the end. You're always doing it differently. You've got a different set of opportunities, experiences, and ways of executing things. So I would say if you're a first-time founder, don't be scared to share. Actually, when you share, that's when things get better.
Yeah.
And when people can help you. Because if you just suffer in silence like we did, that's quite a lonely place to be.
I think that's so important. And actually, really refreshing to hear someone say it in the same sentence as someone did steal our idea.
Yeah.
And actually, it was different execution. I think often we say that in isolation, but it's good to hear from someone who's actually been through that worst case scenario, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very common. Investors will often set up a meeting with you just to get your insight or your data or learn from you. But that's fine, that's fine. They're not you.
There's a brilliant clip somewhere of a professor, I think at Stanford, but insert very good university for business. So, they've got a reputation. I think this is the next serial exited founder, and he spends the first kind of minute talking about all he's done, and it's incredibly impressive. And he tries to sell the classroom a white envelope with an idea in it for like $50, and no one buys it. And he's like, but I've done all these things. Surely someone wants my idea. Like, no one buys it. And he's like, exactly. Like, the value of the idea is nothing. It's the execution. But we're nearly out of time. How has it gone so quickly?
I could talk all day. Talk for England.
It's dangerous. Me too. We could be here. For those just listening, it's quite a warm room, so we'll probably pass out of heat exhaustion at some point. But 2 final questions I always ask every guest.
Yeah.
Firstly, what is the thing that you're most proud of? And it can be around a big life moment. It can be around the startup, whatever you want.
The moment that sticks out is the first time I saw our product on shelf in a real shop. Because when you're a kid, you walk around shops and you just don't even think about who's made that product or where it's come from. And to actually create something tangible, and this is why I love product businesses, that you can hold in your hand and you see other people picking up and interacting with, there's no better feeling. I'm a product person, I think, for that reason. It's just a physical thing. And then obviously my daughter, we made that too.
You've just reminded me, I'm sipping an extra question, but you've just reminded me of something I wanted to come back to and nearly missed. You talked about being an angel investor and asking different questions to the ones that you were asked. Based on your last answer, I'm guessing focus is still on product-based businesses for the startups that you invest in. What are the different questions that you ask as an angel founder that you wish you'd been asked?
Well, first of all, nothing I've invested in has come through an investment meeting. It's come from a conversation. So I've done a few podcasts and that kind of thing. And I find by me being very open and transparent, the kind of founders that approach me afterwards are also those open and transparent founders. And one of the businesses I ended up investing in was a guy who listened to one of these podcasts and he was like, can we just have a chat? Because I just think we've got loads in common. And we did. And he just literally wanted to share, and he ended up telling me all the things that were going wrong with his business, and I ended up investing in it, which is the opposite of what you normally do. Because I was like, I completely get why things have gone a bit south. I really appreciate your transparency. That's the kind of person I want to work with. If I'm going to invest in something, I want to be able to help you. And yeah, let's do it. I can see that there's still massive potential. I don't actually take investment meetings, but I end up investing in stuff that I feel passionate about, that I can see that no B plan mentality, that grit behind the eyes. I like businesses I understand, so I like product businesses in whatever category. But it's not really a focus for me. I think I'm going down a bit of a different path now. So I don't think angel investing and advising or anything is going to be what I do. But those opportunities come along and, if they're interesting, I'll.
And I love that point about being vulnerable with a potential investor, because it gives them a chance to see how they can help.
Yeah.
As much as it gives you a chance to see if they will help.
Yeah. And you can see what's going wrong. Because if there's something fundamentally wrong with the product or there's some legal issue, then that might be a red flag. But if it's something else that's solvable, then it's all right.
Final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Most of my best advice comes from my husband and co-founder. He's very wise. And it was less advice, more a mantra that we lived by for quite a few years when we wanted to quit, or I wanted to quit. And he would just say, we'll quit tomorrow, but today we just give it everything.
I love that.
And then obviously you get up and you do it all again because you're quitting tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, please do take a minute to follow so you never miss another episode. We have some incredible founders coming up. And I always love to hear what resonates with listeners. So do drop us a direct message on Instagram @NotMyFirstGuest with any moments that meant something to you, ideas for future episodes, or your own entrepreneurial stories you want to share. Until next time, happy startupping.